you're not alone, technically. You have people in your life, a group chat that's always going, a family that checks in, maybe a partner sleeping in the same bed. By every outward measure, you are surrounded. And yet there's this feeling, quiet, persistent, impossible to fully explain, that nobody really knows you, that you are present in rooms but absent from them, that you could disappear from a conversation and the version of you that was there wasn't really you anyway. That is not a social problem, that is a psychological one, and it runs much deeper than most people realize. For a lot of people, this kind of loneliness is the hardest to talk about, because it makes no logical sense. You can't say I'm lonely when you're surrounded by people who would be hurt to hear it, so you don't say it. You show up, you participate, you play your part in the conversation, and then you drive home or close the door or put your phone down, and the feeling is still there, unchanged. It shows up at parties where the noise is loud but nothing is connecting. In long friendships where the conversation skims the surface but never goes under. In relationships where you are physically close to someone but privately miles away from them. You laugh at the right moments, you contribute, you perform the version of yourself that keeps things comfortable, and afterwards you feel more drained than before you went. Not because you're introverted, not because you're difficult, but because surface-level contact, repeated over time, doesn't feed what you're actually hungry for. The hunger is for something specific, and most people never name it clearly enough to go looking for it. What you're experiencing is called relational loneliness, and it is entirely different from situational loneliness, which is just the absence of people. Relational loneliness is the absence of depth. It happens when you have contact without connection, presence without being truly seen, interaction without the specific thing that makes interaction feel meaningful, which is the experience of someone knowing the real you and staying anyway. And here's the part that most people miss. Relational loneliness is not usually caused by a lack of good people in your life. It's caused by a barrier, mostly invisible, mostly unconscious, between the version of yourself you let people see and the version that actually exists underneath. That barrier doesn't appear overnight. It gets built slowly by experience. Maybe you shared something real at some point, something honest and unguarded, and it was met with discomfort, dismissal, or the wrong kind of reaction. So you learned to edit yourself before speaking, to filter the parts that felt too raw, too strange, too much, not consciously, just as a quiet, ongoing calculation about what was safe to bring into a room. Or maybe you grew up in an environment where real feelings weren't welcomed, where the emotional temperature had to be managed, kept stable, kept light, where you learned that certain parts of you made other people uneasy, and you began shrinking those parts down to protect the relationship. Over time, the editing becomes automatic. You don't decide to hide yourself. You just notice one day that the self you're presenting to the world has very little overlap with the one you carry privately. And the loneliness that follows isn't the loneliness of being without people. It's the loneliness of being unknown inside the middle of them. It lives in the specifics. Once you start looking, you have a conversation about something real, something you actually care about, and you watch yourself pull back before it gets too honest. You have friendships that feel comfortable but somehow also hollow. You share things online sometimes more honestly than you ever do in person, because the distance makes it feel safer. You meet someone who seems to get you, who asks different questions, notices different things, and you feel it almost physically. The relief of being seen. It's disproportionate, because what they did wasn't extraordinary. They just looked at the real you instead of the managed version, and you realize, in that moment, how rarely that actually happens. Here's something I want you to genuinely consider. Think of the person in your life you feel most yourself around. Now ask, do they know something real about you that most people don't? I'd bet the answer is yes. Tell me in the comments what makes that one person different. I'll be reading them. When relational loneliness goes unaddressed, it doesn't stay still. It compounds. It quietly erodes your sense of self. When nobody reflects the real you back consistently, you start losing track of who that is. You become more fluent in the performed version of yourself than the authentic one, and the distance between the two becomes a source of its own private shame. It can make intimacy feel threatening rather than comforting. Because being truly known requires lowering the barrier, and the barrier has been up so long that lowering it feels like exposure, not connection. So, you stay behind it, and the loneliness stays with you. And the cruelest part is that it can make you believe the problem is with you, that you are simply someone who cannot connect, cannot be understood, cannot have what other people seem to have with each other. That's not the truth. That is the cost of a protective pattern that has been running so long it started to feel like a personality trait. The loneliness you feel around people is not proof that you are hard to love. It is proof that you have spent a very long time making yourself easy to be around and almost no time letting yourself be truly known. Those are opposite things, and you cannot get the connection you need by perfecting the performance. You can only get it by slowly, carefully choosing to let the performance down. This is not about being broken or fundamentally disconnected. It is not a fixed feature of who you are. It is a learned protection, a wall that made sense when it was built, because something at some point made openness feel unsafe. The fact that it no longer serves you doesn't make you damaged. It makes you someone who learned too well, and what was learned can be unlearned, not all at once, but in moments. 3 things. Realistic, uncomfortable in the best way. First, identify one person and go slightly deeper. Not a dramatic revelation, just one honest thing in one conversation that you would normally keep back. Notice what happens. Most of the time, the response is not what the old protective part of you predicted. And that new data is how the wall starts to shift. Second, notice when you're performing and get curious, not critical. In the middle of a surface conversation, instead of pushing through it, ask yourself, what would I actually say here if I weren't editing? You don't have to say it yet. Just knowing what it is matters. Third, seek environments built for depth. Certain spaces make real conversation more possible. Smaller gatherings, shared purpose, creative work, therapy, communities built around meaning rather than status. Put yourself in them more often. Context shapes connection more than most people realize. There is nothing wrong with you for needing to be known. That is not neediness. That is one of the most fundamental things a person can require. The loneliness you've been carrying in rooms full of people, in conversations that skim the surface, in relationships that stay comfortable but never go deep, that loneliness is not a life sentence. It is a signal. It is your real self, still there underneath the performance, still wanting to be let into the room. If this video named something you've never quite been able to say out loud, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe if you want more of this. Every week we go into the psychology that explains the patterns most people live inside without ever seeing clearly. And leave a comment with this: do you feel more yourself online or in person, and why? There's no wrong answer. I genuinely want to know. See you next week.